In this video, I'm going to be telling you why you might not need an ND filter and why you should be cranking your shutter instead. Alright, you might be wondering what's up with the suit. Aaron, why are you looking so fresh? I'm testing a new lav concealing method for a suit jacket. See how it goes. I'm actually probably going to be using it tomorrow, so hopefully this sounds good. It's a whole new concealer and everything. See how it does with movement, and then how it cleans up as well. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. You're just gonna have to deal with me looking pretty fresh, pretty sharp. So So what I said was a pretty crazy claim, or at least what I think a lot of people would think is a crazy claim. We have been told by so many YouTubers, and I remember thinking this at the very beginning, that you cannot have good video without the 180-degree shutter angle rule, right? And so what is shutter angle? Well, it's, basically shutter speed, but for video. It goes way back into the film days. What we typically associate with proper cinematic shutter angle is 180 degrees. So if your frame rate is 24, that's 48. Fujifilm does have 48, which is really nice. But most cameras that are mirrorless, you need to use 50. Some cameras actually have shutter angle too, which is amazing, because then when you go to 60, it's double your frame rate. So what's the math there? It is 60 plus 60, or 60 times 2, 120. Boom. Math. Fun, right? At the end of the video, I'll share a few situations where you should invest in an ND filter and when you should use ND filters. Okay, my first point is that the ND filter might be ruining your image. So you might be thinking like, well, it can't. Like it's the only other option is I crank my shutter and it looks terrible, or I stop down and then there's no shallow depth of field. Well, a lot of cheap ND filters cause crazy tint shifts. I've seen so many people post on forums and stuff like, why is my image so soft? It doesn't look in focus at all. And it's cheap ND filters. And there's a lot of times that these ND filters can ruin your image. There's also some bad glares on cheap ones that look really kind of wacky to me. And so that's one reason that I think you can really ruin your image with a cheap ND filter. My next point is, if you are a wedding videographer, I would go as far to say that when it comes to equipment, your filters are probably the least important thing, because A, your clients aren't going to know and your prospective clients are not going to know. Additionally, if you use slow motion, you don't need an ND filter, because what do we want from slow motion? We want smooth, cinematic looking imagery. And smooth does not mean motion blur. We want it to be smooth. So you can crank your shutter for those portraits and a lot of that outdoor stuff. Another point is, on wedding days, the fast movement is like the dances at reception, or the dance floor at reception, or people like hanging out inside. A lot of those times I am at 180-degree shutter angle without a filter, because I'm able to pick the amount of light that I want and then have my shutter angle set at 180 degrees. And so, yeah, for the dances, like there might be some good amount of motion, but you're at 180 degrees because you need light. On the other end of it, ceremonies are generally pretty slow. They're standing there, looking at each other, talking. They might slide a ring on. They might, while they're walking, they're usually walking really slow. The only time that I notice, and sometimes I'm like, man, I should have put an ND filter on, is when it's windy, like really windy. That's when you start to see some form of like weird jittery movement. Other than that, I don't notice it, and I know my clients don't notice it. So my point is, on a wedding day, it's one of the least important things, I think. These are all opinions. Don't burn me at the stake. I will say, if you are like chilling and you're like, I'm I'm so good at shooting weddings and like I want to up it another level, then yeah, by all means. But if you're sacrificing your audio quality, if you're sacrificing shots because you're unscrewing an ND filter, if you're sacrificing like certain gear because you can't afford it, then I think you should not worry about it and you should just capture amazing imagery with what you got. The shot is way more important than proper motion blur. And so, yeah, don't sacrifice amazing shots because you feel like they slow you down. I personally feel like on a normal like wedding day where I'm inside and outside a decent amount, I feel like it slows me down. If you're new and investing in gear, then don't buy variable ND filters. This goes back to my point one, that if you don't have the budget for quality variable ND filters, I think they'll do more harm than good. Your images are all going to be different colors. You're going to spend so much time in post. And if you're new, you're not going to know how to fix that in post. And additionally, it might be soft. There's so many issues that can happen with cheap variable ND filters. So just don't buy cheap ones if you're sacrificing audio equipment or if you're sacrificing quality because you're buying cheap variable ND filters. If you're new, I think that should be low on your priority list. By all means, if you are killing it on all those other things that I mentioned, then it's time for some ND filters. But if you don't have the budget, if you're inexperienced and that's one thing that's slowing you down, then it's not time for that yet. Okay, now there's one other exception to this, and this is if you want the cranked shutter look. And this is less for the documentary and wedding filmmakers, and this is more for like narrative filmmaking. But there are some movies that use a cranked fast shutter to create like this kind of hectic look. So one example is Saving Private Ryan. They used a narrow shutter angle to kind of create some of that hectic look and also show detail. And so if you're shooting in 24 frames a second, then there's a lot of times when your shutter speed is at 1/48 or 180 degrees, there's a lot of times where anything that moves is very blurry and it's hard to see detail. And so they wanted to show the grittiness of what they were going through. And so the explosions, you can actually see detail in the sand and on helmets and stuff like that. And so that's one time to kind of do that, is to show more detail and to kind of just create this like kind of hectic nature. A lot of fight scenes will have the same, so you see a little more detail during fight scenes, stuff like that. So drop in the comments, actually, if you know of a few situations where they use a narrow shutter angle. I think that'd be cool to kind of hear some other examples. Okay, and before we move on to some times where I think it's time to invest in an ND filter and all that, hit that subscribe button. That'd be awesome if you could. That helps me out way more than you can imagine. I also have some links in the bio with gear that I use, and there might be an ND filter on there because I do sometimes use variable ND, especially for commercial work. And so that leads me straight into my first point. If you are doing higher production work or just stuff where you can plan a lot, then ND is great and you should use it. And so, commercial work is a great example. You plan a lot of the shots, if not all of the shots, and you also plan the lighting and all that. And so that's time to use that ND filter and to add it on there. The other time is when you are ready to invest in quality variable ND filters. And so I think if you can buy, a $200 variable ND, I think I've even bought a $150 one. I'll leave links in the comments actually of the 3 that I've used and the 2 that I would suggest. But once you're ready to invest in that and you've already got good lighting and good audio equipment and good cameras and lenses, then it's, that's the next step, I think. And really, some wedding days you might get slowed down because of them, or it might really mess you up and you might miss shots, but some days it might be perfect to have. Or documentary stuff where you have at least a little more time, or if you're on a documentary shoot and you're like, I'm outside all day long, of course throw that ND filter on there. But there are instances where you shouldn't. So I'll end this video by saying, I know I'm gonna receive a lot of hate, a lot of downvotes on this. That's fine, just click it twice if you're gonna do that. But I stole that from another YouTuber. I gotta say, I don't know who it was, but I definitely stole that. However, I will say that I do stand by the fact that, like, if you're gonna miss shots because of VND filters or they're gonna look bad, then ditch them. Now, will it make your footage look better? Maybe a little bit, sure. I won't disagree with the fact that there is a little bit of a difference. But to end it, I did crank my shutter on this, and I'm just curious if you noticed before I said it. I mean, you might be able to go back and see my hands now, but I'm curious if you noticed beforehand. So drop that in the comments. Say like, yeah, dude, I spotted it right away. Or no, you're right, I didn't notice. So remember, the story and the shots are the most important thing. Only invest in them if you're experienced, and it won't slow you down on documentary or wedding days, because it doesn't matter how perfect that motion blur was in that shot if you never got it in the first place. Or the best option, get a camera with built-in ND. I wish that I had one, maybe someday. But that would be the best option. Unfortunately, mirrorless, which is easiest for run and gun, at least weddings and stuff, that doesn't exist yet. I don't think anyone has built-in ND. There are adapters with ND, which seems to be pretty nice. So in closing, let's fight it out in the comments. Let's actually be nice. There are going to be some people that will die on the hill of you cannot shoot video without, you know, 180-degree shutter angle. There's gonna be some people that die on the hill of like, it doesn't matter for weddings. And so let's be nice in the comments below, and stay tuned and subscribe so you can catch my next video where I'm gonna be talking about when and why you should be using a slow shutter. And I'll also show you Fuji users how to do that, because it's a little tricky sometimes. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later. I'm so awkward.